Hello, everyone. Hi. Wow, this is a very nice crowd. Great to have you all here today. My name is Margie Cook. I'm part of the team that brings you live from NYPL. And I just want to say hello to everybody who is watching right now, those of you in the room and those of you watching online. There are, of course, many things you can do with your time. So I'm grateful, and as all of us are, that you choose to spend it here with us. I am so pleased to introduce Neel Mukherjee, author of several critically acclaimed novels, including The Lives of Others, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. He is here with the one and only Hanya Yanagihara, novelist and editor-in-chief of T Magazine. You can find their full bios in your printed program or on the event listing on the website. And to tell you a little bit more about Neel's book, Choice, is on one hand an exploration of free will and personal accountability. And on the other hand, as one character observes, no escape was offered by making what one thought was the correct moral choice. In other words, we are presented with a world where there are no unambiguous right or wrongs. It is a brilliant novel that is more than just ethical dilemmas or characters deciding on how much truth to tell one another. What is true is it's often other people's stories that offer a space within which we can step back and stop struggling to control our own narrative. And perhaps that there is the gift. So his book is available for purchase for both of you, for those of you who are in this room, and through our online shop for those of you attending virtually, whichever way you purchase it. And please do, if you are able, proceeds go to benefit the New York Public Library. And for those of you here tonight, there will be a signing after the event. And for you online folks, if you need a link to purchase, we'll put it in the chat right away if we haven't already. And of course, if you have a New York Public Library card, you can get the book for free. So before I turn it over, I really want to tell you about a few events that we have coming up this month. On May 7th, we still have live stream tickets available for Jamaica Kincaid and Carol Walker, who will be joined by Hilton Als, and they are discussing their book, An Encyclopedia of Gardening for Colored Children. The renowned novelists and the revered artists will discuss their new book, which is a unique collaboration that explores the hidden history of the plant world. And later this month, please join us in the Public Theater for Transforming Shakespeare with Julian Mesri, Rebecca Martinez, and Amrita Ramanan on May 14th. The creators behind the Public Theater's mobile unit, The Comedy of Errors, will discuss the process of adapting a classic Shakespeare tale into an English and Spanish musical. And please stay tuned for how you can see The Comedy of Errors, bilingual edition, at New York Public Library. And on May 16th, we are delighted to welcome Cullum Toybeen with Quillan Hughes, who will discuss Toybeen's long-awaited follow-up to the best-selling novel, Brooklyn. And last but not least, acclaimed investor and climate champion Tom Steyer will be here in conversation with David Wallace Wells, and he will share his unique and unvarnished perspective on how each of us can fight climate change here on May 22nd. So please be sure to register at nypl.live. We hope to see you here. And one last thing, you may see an index card on your seat. Please use those cards for writing questions. You'll see a staff member come up around and collect them during the program. And lastly, Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Isfahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos. And of course, by all of you, our wonderful supporters and friends near and far. Thank you for that support, and thank you again for being here. And with that, let's please welcome our guests.
Thank you. Oh, thanks. Okay, thank you so much. Well, I'm thrilled to be here tonight with Neel Mukherjee, who's not only a beloved friend, but one of my favorite contemporary writers. And I think all writers in the audience know there's certain writers that you read and you think, oh God, I should just give up now. Neel is that person for me. We're here to discuss Neel's newest novel, Choice, which I'm going to make him synopsize for you. Sorry, Neel.
Oh my God.
But I will say this. It does what I believe a novel should, which is not only expand our definition of what a novel is, which we'll talk about, but make us confront what art is for. Like many of J.M. Coetzee's books, it's both unsparing and intensely readable, and I've been thinking about it since I read it this past December. I should also add, this is the fourth time we've been in conversation, and the second time we've done so drunk. So who knows how this will go? So Neel, I'm going to make you.
She had one sip, and
Yeah, but I'm on
I've had about
codeine.
half a bottle
I'm on
already.
codeine.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so Neel,
Too much information.
too much information. But I'm going to make you do the obvious work. I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about just the plot of this extraordinary book, and we'll get to what inspired it.
Wouldn't it be more fun if you drunk summarized it?
No, I don't think I can. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to look like a fool in front of the New York Public Library audience. That's for you.
Hanya, thank you. Yes, it is my fourth conversation with her. It's a triptych, and it's not a collection of linked stories, as some reviewers have called it. That's the most unimportant thing about the book. That's a collection of three linked stories. It's like saying Anna Karenina is a collection of pages. Yes, I mean yes, it is, but that's what it most fundamentally is. It's my triptych novel, as I call it, and it's in 3 panels. If you imagine a triptych, a Renaissance or a medieval triptych, there are 3 panels. And how you see them when you encounter the work on the wall or a book, a reproduction in a book, is do you see all 3 together? Obviously, you can't read all 3 narratives together. You take them one by one as they come. And each panel in the book is complete in itself and tells one complete story. And the next panel moves on to something else. And my idea was that the readers would read the 3 panels and each would make a certain kind of sense. And then you'd finish reading the book and it would continue in your head, ideally, and the 3 together would make a slightly different kind of sense in your head. It's a thinky book. I mean, Hanya and I are going to talk about the novel form in a little bit because she started off by talking about it. I feel in these very conservative times, people want, and by people I don't just mean readers, but the literary establishment, the reviewing scene, etc. They all want storybooks, and I'm growing old, and I'm becoming very suspicious of storytelling, and I want to question the whole business of storytelling itself. Why do we tell stories? Who tells stories? Who tells what stories? And can we make that business of storytelling turbulent? So I wanted to write not a simple storybook, but a more complicated one, and one also that troubles the smoothness of narrative or storytelling. I wanted it to be an unsafe book. And too much of storytelling, too much of novel writing, I feel is safe. You read a story, you're moved, the prose is lovely, the point of view is all correct, the characters have depth and interiority, and then you finish reading it, you've read the story, you've consumed it, smooth as a banana, and it's forgotten. I wanted to do something very different with this book. Therefore, yeah.
Okay, I think we can go now. But
I have to summarize the book now. Okay, so
yeah,
it's
I was going to say.
So it's in 3 panels. The first panel, the central character is a London-based publisher called Ayush. His husband is an economist. Ayush is British Indian. Luke is white British, his husband. They have twins, Masha and Sasha. Ayush works in publishing. And he... yes, it's set in London now. I'm gonna go into the nitty-gritty of the story later when she asks me more about the first panel. The second panel is the story of an academic called Emily, who is an early modernist, a 16th century scholar, which I used to be in a past life. I'm not joking, I really used to be a 16th century scholar in a past life. The conceit is that this story of Emily is a story in a book that Ayush publishes, Ayush of Part 1 publishes. That's the most obvious link between the first and the second panel, and the most irrelevant link, if you will. It's like that linked short story thing. And the third, and she's in a car crash, she's in an Uber accident. I don't name Uber because of course, liability reasons. She's in a car ride app accident at the beginning of the story, coming back home from a dinner party at a friend's, and after the accident, her life goes in an entirely unexpected direction. She meets up with the driver of the car, who it turns out is not who he says he is, or the ride app says he is. It turns out he's an Eritrean illegal immigrant in London. I have a private story to tell you about that second panel because it comes from an event in my life, but I'll tell you that later. The third panel is a story, again, the conceit is that it's written by an economist, a development economist, who works on something called asset transfers, which are one way of getting the ultra poor lifted out of poverty is to give them an asset that will generate income. And in this case, the asset is a cow, which is given to an extremely poor family in a tiny village on the border of West Bengal and Bangladesh. And the conceit is that it's written by, again, someone that Ayush meets at a party and commissions a book from her. So this is how the three panels work.
That's very good.
Okay.
Okay, good. But I wanted to go back to something you said about your suspicion, this is my word, not yours, of the realist novels. You said in your notes to me before this conversation that you wanted to discuss, quote, storytelling and narrative and your impatience with it. Do you feel that the idea of narrative or storytelling is overvalued, or as you said, or you suggested earlier, cozy? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
It's kind of become sclerotic, I think, in a way, like a smooth, continuous novel, beginning, middle, end. As I said, character, dialogue, everything perfect and stuff. The MFA kind of novel.
Yeah.
Yes, I am impatient with that. I feel all realist writers also become impatient with the realist model. Hence, I suppose, autofiction, a genre I do not like, and I have no truck with. But yes, it's an impatience with realism. It's also the impatience with how storytelling or narrative can somehow lull you, or I feel narrative is a trap, So, a very smart reader who read a proof, a galley of the book, wrote a very small review in one of the trade magazines, and he said, "This book reminds me of the films of Michael Haneke." And I felt a chime inside me. He said, "Yes, of course, Haneke is a very big influence on me." I said, "Yes, I wanted it to be a book like Haneke." If you see the films of Haneke, he makes the act of watching a film very unsafe. If you think of a film like Code Unknown or Cachet, he kind of dissolves a kind of fourth wall and brings the reader into a kind of complicity with what is going on in the film. And you feel deeply uncomfortable. And I wanted to write a book like that, a book that will really make you question your own life, your own choices. So,
yeah, it's impossible not to. Who's read the book? Okay, so some people have read the book. But this is good to know, so we know.
Oh my God, I have a former student here sitting on the front row.
That's so nice.
Have you seen him? Yeah. Okay.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
All right, so not to sort of give away too many details, because the idea of a spoiler alert dies hard even with an intellectual novel, experimental novel. But of course, this book is an indictment of both capitalism and its foil, or stepsister, which is neoliberal good intentions.
Yeah.
And how did you write about these topics without? This is one of the things I thought most when reading it about making the book without making it into a screed or a polemic. That's question one. Yeah. And question two, and one of the things that makes this book dangerous, of course, is that the very people who are probably going to be reading this book are going to be implicated in its very story.
The first question is difficult to answer. It happens by chance, Not all people are finding it unpolemical. There is a review who thinks the whole book is hampered by a didactic tone. I tried not to be didactic. But, think of the novel form. Middlemarch is didactic. Daniel Deronda is didactic. Magic Mountain is didactic. I mean, what is she talking about? Right. How did I? Yes, it is a book centrally about capitalism, and I wanted to sort of advance my thinking about capitalism that I had done in my two previous books. So both Lives of Others and A State of Freedom tried to think about what I would call the macro effects, or the bigger outside world, external world effects of capitalism, such as I try to think about poverty, I try to think about inequality, both very unfashionable topics in the Western novel form at the moment, because they are really trivial compared to writing about yourself. So, but then for choice, I thought I wanted to look at the micro effects of capitalism. It's the economic order that rules us. It makes the world for us. It makes us. There is no space outside it in the world. How does it affect our souls? How does it affect our interiority, our minds? Every little micro things that make up the inner self of a person, how does capitalism affect that? And this is my answer to that. So as I said, you have to think about themes and ethical concerns and all other things, but you have to think them through character. There's a wonderful Canadian pianist, my favorite pianist in the world, called Angela Hewitt. She was giving a concert in Wigmore Hall in London, the city where I live, of the 17th century French composer Jean-Philippe Rameau. And 17th century music is incredibly difficult, particularly Rameau's music. The left hand becomes right, the right hand becomes left. It's very difficult to read the music because there are contractions. He leaves a lot up to the interpretation of the pianist. Everything like tempi, ornamentation. The ornamentations are also fiercely difficult. And while Angela Hewitt was explaining this after playing one of the suites, she said, I have to keep all those in mind, and at the same time, I have to make music. I thought, yes, I have to keep all those ideas in mind, but I have to disguise them in a story. But I can also question the disguising in the story within the story itself. So this is a novel that is constantly querying the novel form, I hope. So.
Yes, I think it's also querying what the novel used to do. I mean, we talked a little bit in our pre-conversation exchange about the granularity of the book, and I want to talk about that more. But one of Choice's great pleasures and powers is its attention to detail, especially in the third part, where Gari, who's the woman who gets the cow in this village, when her life is broken down ruthlessly into numbers, the amount of money she needs to buy X or Y, the amount of money each missed hour of work costs, the amount of the amount of time it takes her to walk to the woman's house she cleans, and so on and so forth. And I found this one of the most thrilling and brutal parts of the book, how quantifiable her life is, and all lives in the village are, and all lives in poverty ultimately are. And it reminded me of what I love most about 18th and 19th century novels, especially Jane Austen, in which money is never euphemistic.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Everyone is costed down to the last penny.
Exactly. The actual amounts are always given to the reader, and everyone is valued at a pound amount.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So will you talk about this here? And so in a way, it is a return to an earlier novelistic tradition. Money suddenly disappeared from the modern novel, didn't it? The figures. So will you talk about the power of the actual figures, numerical figures in fiction, and in this book in particular?
There is a whole book. There's a whole academic, or there are several academic books in that question. Actually, why did money become so occluded in the 20th century? Capitalism, I think. It tries to make money something invisible.
Right.
It tries to make money something atomized. So two things disappeared from the novel: labor and money. And so it's astonishing reading a book like a working class writer's book like Arnold Bennett or someone, or even Philip Roth's American Pastoral, where the details of that glove making factory, it's extraordinary, the amount of attention he pays to the work that makes this family rich. Swede Lvov, I think his name is, the main character. So money disappeared from the novel, but quite late, actually. You find money in Eliot. Yeah. You find money in James. Money is everywhere in James. And he understood the value of money.
In war.
Yeah, and it's in war, and then suddenly, as capitalism advanced, money disappears from the novel. And I wanted to bring money back. I mean, money is everywhere in my novel. Money is in Lives of Others. Money is in State of Freedom. But here, in that third narrative, which is set in that tiny village between Bangladesh and West Bengal, where this cow is given to them, the poor, what economists call the choice palette of the poor, it's severely restricted. And what other classes of people might think of them as making poor choices or bad choices, because they are so constrained, their choices inhabit, it changes something about the way they think about what is available to them, and they make choices accordingly. So I wanted to focus, of course, on the granularity of that. So on one hand, there is an impatience with the realist novel, but there's also something that I like very much about the realist novel, is that it's the kind of painstaking tribute it pays to reality itself. I like that very much. I want the realist novel to be realistic. So you have great details about how she makes cow dung cakes and how she milks a cow. I've done both in my childhood. And I still have the muscle memory in my hand from milking a cow. You never forget that. Or patting a cow dung cake. There's a particular movement you need to do to make the cow dung stick to the wall. I don't think I'll ever forget that. So I wanted it to be very clear-eyed and very unblinking about those things.
I mean, especially in that third part, the accumulation of numbers is relentless, and the reader feels that she is drowning alongside the character.
She is drowning. You know, this cow has been given. So the idea is that the cow, which is an asset which has been transferred to her, will lift her out of poverty. And every single development economist will tell you correctly that asset transfers are very successful. The data says to them that 95% of asset transfers are extremely successful. I'm a novelist. I will immediately ask the question, what happens to the other 5%?
The 5%.
And I wanted to write about the other 5%.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to demolish the work of economists at all. It's just that I think about the term capitalism in a very different way from how they do.
Well, this is probably one of the few novels that should be read by economists as well. And
I'm not going to be making friends with them with this book, I feel.
No, but you might. That 5% is what's interesting to you. Do you want to read apart from the third section?
Sure.
No?
Let me read the opening section of the third part.
Okay.
I have to go. I have to go up there.
Yeah, there's a whole ceremony.
I can't sit and read. It's very short. She used to arrive in a tempo on an early afternoon in spring when the weather has already turned too hot, but it is still a good while from the sowing of Aush paddy. Mira and Shahadev have been sitting since dawn in a patch of shade that keeps moving with the sun. They know she's going to come in a tempo today, and they're more curious about the tempo because they have never seen a motor car in their short lives. There are no roads in Nonapani. There are no roads anywhere near Nonapani. You'd have to go nearly 20 miles east near the border village of Dhopabari to see a tar and crushed stone chips road. How the tempo is going to come to the children's hut is a big question, but it doesn't occur to them. It evidently doesn't cross their mother Shobita's mind either, for she comes out of the hut frequently and under the guise of chivvying the children, lingers outside on each occasion and looks into the distance the way she does when she's expecting the children's father to return. In a way, she is looking for him, for he too is expected to arrive in the tempo. That's what he had said when he had left yesterday. We will return riding in a motor car, a big one, maybe a tempo or even lorry, because a motor car would be too small. He knows all these things because he works in cities and towns. He's gone for months and months, then comes back for a few days, occasionally for a few weeks when he's in between jobs, then ups and leaves again. The children call him Baba, of course, and are happy when he arrives, largely because of the presents he brings. lodgings wrapped in shiny cellophane or plastic, little painted tin boxes that once must have held something they do not know what. Shirts and short pants for Shohodeb, frocks for Mira, clothes for both children, too loose and big on them. You'll grow into them, he would say. Better to have something ready for the future than clothes you no longer fit into and will have to discard in a few months. What a waste of money. Plastic balls and plastic dolls with pale pink-orange skin and red-painted lips, once even a wind-up tin rooster that stopped working after one day. These things brought excitement and novelty to the children's unvarying days, but they were formal and aloof with their father, shy, as they would be with a distant relative or a stranger. Their mother would have to say to them sometimes, "Go sit with your Baba," or "Go talk to Baba, he's here only for a few days. You won't see him for a long time after he leaves." Mira and Shohodeb would try to get out of these directives, but when they couldn't, a sense of stilted dutifulness marked their actions, not easy affection. Now they await Baba's arrival, but only as an effect. He will be arriving in the temple with the gift that is meant for the whole family, but it is really the sighting of a motor car that the children are waiting for. They move to the outskirts of their hamlet. Outskirts makes it sound grand. In reality, it's only 4 dispersed huts away. From this point, there are only flat fields and earth, nothing to obstruct their view. It is well after the sun has begun its climb down from the highest point in the sky that the children spy movement on the horizon. Mira starts to count, 1, 2, 3, 4, leaving out the cow in the midst of the advancing silhouetted figures. There is no tempo. Shohodeb runs home. They're coming, he announces to his mother, spinning around. But they're walking, there's no motor car. You silly boy, how can they come in a motor car? There are no roads here.
I mean, I think one of the most chilling parts about part 3, this is the cow story that Neel just read from, is as a reader, one begins by rooting for Gauri, the woman who gets the cow, and by the end, one's disgusted with her, which just shows how capitalism assumes that the person who can't make it work is to blame ultimately.
You think so? I wrote her with great compassion, actually. So.
No, but you do write her with great compassion, which is why the impatience I felt at least was so upsetting.
Yeah, people have felt that about Ayush too in section 1.
Oh yes, all of them.
Yeah, people.
I mean, all of them are maddening figures in their own way, written with great sympathy, but.
I think Emily is maddening, perhaps, but I love Ayush. He's so.
Oh, interesting.
He's such a.
And I hated his children.
He's.
I know we disagree on that.
He's such a skinless person. He's one person who. We to go through late capitalist life, we need to be selectively blind and selectively deaf, and I think he lacks that filter.
Yes, I think he's very tender.
And tortured. And he makes life memorably miserable for himself and for everyone around him.
And for everybody else. But isn't that a kind of self-indulgence?
Sure, but he's trying to find a way out. And one of the questions the book asks is there a way out of the world that we have created for ourselves? Is there a space outside this where we can stand and maneuver for something better, perhaps?
Well, but one of the ways that Ayush does this, and I would say Ayush is, well, anyway, Emily's pretty bad too, but I want to talk about this idea of gifts, which runs throughout the book and which are inextricable from an idea of sacrifice. In part 1, Ayush gives his husband the gift of their children. He later admits that he didn't really want them. Yeah. In part 2, Emily gives a stranger an extraordinary gift that you'll have to read about to find out. And in part 3, Gauri's given the gift of a cow. And I think part of the book's squeamish pleasure is that it forces us to examine the intention of a gift. A gift from the self, the pleasure one gets from giving, which is a kind of selfishness in and of itself. And throughout the book, a present is used as an alleviator of guilt, a chit, and a kind of self-congratulation. How central was that to the conception of the book?
You see, not at all. And I'll tell. No. Wait. I'll tell you why.
Okay, tell me.
It's extraordinary that this meaning has emerged, and it's entirely correct because they all give gifts in the book, or they receive gifts, and it ruins people's lives, or there is some kind of appropriation going on, or there's something very miscalculated or a wrong choice that is made.
And there's not a single gift that works out well.
Yes, it seems that that's the kind of shadow book that developed that, independent of my intentions. And whenever I teach my students about, I always teach them a small Roland Barthes essay called "The Death of the Author," and I tell them an authorial intention means nothing. And I'm standing there thinking, really, I do want my books to mean something that I want them to mean, but at the same time, the text has its own intentions, I feel. So I feel this is one of the cases where textual intention kind of overpowered what I was trying to write about and created a different shadow meaning to the book. Tolstoy wanted his readers to condemn Anna. She's an adulteress. And he was writing it from a very Christian, moralistic point of view. And I think he fell in love with Anna while writing Anna. And at the same time, when readers fell in love with her, he was outraged. He wrote this essay saying, no, I meant you to condemn her and stuff. But the book has its own intentions. He couldn't control that.
Well, I never cared for Anna.
Sorry?
I never cared for Anna.
I
Did you?
I do, actually.
Right.
I do care for her. I'll tell you the character who irritates me is Natasha in War and Peace. I was rereading it 2 years ago, and I wanted to slap her. I just thought, you're irritating everyone.
Well, but I mean, don't you think I'm sure someone's written an actual book about this, or at least a doctorate thesis, but the book, the shadow book that emerges, the one you don't know you were writing, the one that comes out in the subtext is always, not always, but often as interesting as the actual intentional book, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah. No, I mean, we write our books, and we have our own relationship with it, which is kind of secret, and it's only known to us, the kind of book that we have written. And I feel for me, the book that this is for me is how we try to bring certain lenses to bear upon reality, and none of them can actually account for the glorious killing mess that reality is.
Yeah.
Like, the novel is a model of that mess. Economics is a model of trying to understand what that mess of reality is. And there is no substitute for it.
Right.
Reality is its own representation.
And it is a metaphor for capitalism itself, in a sense, right?
Yes.
Something that was supposed to do one thing and ended up doing another, at the shadow side of the system itself.
Yeah, and it ended up appropriating everything.
Yeah.
Right? There's no space outside it, right?
Yeah.
And capitalism is not going to end because something else is going to come and take its place. It's going to end because it is going to keep developing, and it'll eat itself, I think.
Well, and I think every realistic or semi-realist novel is in conversation with the system of capitalism.
Yes, of course, it has to.
be,
And the novel form itself, if you think of as all literary genres doing social work, as I feel like a good Marxist literary critic, I feel that all genres do social work. So the epic is involved in the legitimization of the nation state, or the pastoral form is involved in the legitimization of certain forms of landowning. I feel the novel form emerges at a time when capitalism is nascent, rationalist individualism is emerging, and the novel form becomes the literary handmaiden of a new economic system. But at the same time, from the very beginning, it questions that as well. I mean, think of how everything, if you think of in the Anglophone world, if you think of Robinson Crusoe, the first novel, think of how minutely everything is catalogued in Robinson Crusoe. And the way it is distributed, stored, given. So,
has a non-capitalist system created a great body of literature, in your opinion?
Russia, of course.
But
I'm nothing without the Russian novelist. So
right.
So yeah, I mean, the novel form is everyone's.
But all the
nice.
novels you just named, the great Russian novels, were predated the capitalist system.
Yes,
there.
of course. Yeah.
Right.
No, I mean, in their country, but by that time in the West, capitalism was very advanced. I think by the time people like Tolstoy and others come to write, the Industrial Revolution is about.
So you're saying the best novels are written in the nascent years of mass capitalism?
Oh no, I think we are living in the golden age of the novel. I think some contemporary work is just, I mean, astonishing. I feel, and writers are coming back to asking or querying capitalism in their form. So, my friend Adele Waldman has written a novel called Help Wanted, which is about how capitalism screws over labor always. And I lost this thread of thought. You have to ask me again.
I know. Well, all right. So I'll ask another question about intentions, because we were just talking to them about them to some extent. You know, as I've said, the book discusses slyly and devastatingly the gospel of good intentions, which end in grotesquely, frankly. Will you talk about the value of intention, both in the worlds of this book and in fiction in general?
Well, I suppose you can think of capitalism itself as an intentionalist form, because there are, say for example, the work of development economists that I was talking about. You know, how to solve poverty, how to make the lot of poor people better. That is an intention, right? The kind of, you know, there is an intervention in the real world. Although they live in a very highly abstracted world of pure math, their theories make the world in certain ways. So there is intention there. How aware they are of it, I do not know. But I'm slightly queasy talking about intentions. Do we really know what our intentions are like? And should a novel really have intentions? I mean, of course, I wanted this novel to make you go away and think about your own life, make you feel unsafe and uncomfortable. I'm not in the business of giving comfort and sort of soothing you with stories. There are many, many other writers who do that. I don't want to be another pin in that very crowded pincushion. But apart from that, when you move away from that, talking about intention becomes theoretically dodgy, I think. You know, do your novels have intentions?
Well, all novels have intention, right?
Okay.
They're authors' intentions.
Right. You believe in authorial intention? I believe authorial intention.
I mean, I don't think you can write without it. Whether it's successful and whether it becomes the most compelling part of the book is another question. But one can't write without something that one's trying to communicate.
You want to.
Right?
You have an idea that you want to write about. That itself is an intention.
I mean, it's an argument to some extent, always, right? If it's worth writing. You know, another idea that unites the three parts is the hovering question of whose story is it. Emily writes herself into another story. This is in part 2. Ayush in part 1 allows himself to succumb to the sort of dark magic of an unauthored narrative. And I know we both agree that anyone should be able to write about anything. Why does the question of authorial rights make its way into this book with such urgency?
I was kind of thinking about our cultural moment, actually, that all these, this kind of appropriationist moment, or moment of questioning what is called appropriation. And I was thinking, no notion of power is unappropriated. And it's good that the kids are thinking about who can tell a story.
What do you tell your kids?
I don't believe in appropriation, up to a point.
What's the point?
I'm not going to go and write a novel set amongst the Inuit in Greenland, unless I go and live there for 10 years and do research. I feel what the kids are questioning, rightly in my opinion, is that it's been done badly, it's been done irresponsibly, and it's done by a set of people with power who thought they could tell the stories of the powerless. That itself is a problematic concept, I feel. And in the second narrative, Emily appropriates someone's story. But I don't want to use the term appropriate. It makes me, I want you to go and think what is happening in the story. I will not give you any answers. In fact, I don't have any answers to what she does in that story. That story came from, as I said earlier, it came from a private, how are we doing for time? It came from a thing in my life. There's a charity, so Britain is the only country in Europe, actually Britain is no longer in Europe. Britain was the only country in Europe which had an incredibly inhumane, and continues to have an inhumane, asylum immigration system, and that was the indefinite detention of asylum seekers. So if you fetched up as a refugee in Britain and you sought asylum, while your asylum application was being processed, you entered certain detention centers, and you could be there forever. You entered a black hole. And the Home Office would not give you an answer. Like, it could take years, decades and you'd be in this limbo. You couldn't work in the country. A group of people were trying to end this practice, cruel practice. Two charity organizations, one called the Refugee Tales and one called Gatwick Detention Welfare Group. Gatwick is an airport in the south of London, in Sussex, where a lot of these flights came. This charity, Refugee Tales, they decided to team up authors with some of these asylum seekers, and the asylum seekers would interestingly tell the writers the story of their lives and how they came to Britain, and the writers would write them up. So automatically, look, someone is telling someone else's story. Right. And this came out in volumes every year called The Refugee Tales. And the novelist Ali Smith said to me, Neel, I think you should be on their radar. And so I thought, yes, I'm going to do this. And the person they got me to meet was a guy called Usman Salih. He's in the acknowledgement section of my book. And I wrote, Usman was an illegally conscripted Eritrean soldier who was trafficked into slavery twice, once in Libya and once in Sudan. First Sudan and then Libya. And then he did that Mediterranean crossing to Italy. He escaped from Italy to France, and then from France he was a stowaway on the Eurostar and came to Britain and sought asylum. And I told his story in Refugee Tales. And the story never left me. I wanted to write more about it. It was not my story to tell. And then I was invited by a publication called the Cahiers series. They publish very beautiful, slim books. And my only remit there was you can write fiction or non-fiction, but you have to write about the theme of translation. And I thought translation, of course, literally means from one place to another, which is the definition of a life of an immigrant. But I didn't do it. I wrote something else for the Cahiers series. And so Usman's story sat in my head, and I found a form to pour it into by querying the whole business of who tells whose story in Emily's story. So that's how her story came about.
We have 2 more minutes. Do you want to read another section, or do you want to take one more question before we're going to answer some questions from the audience?
I can read a very little bit from the Emily section, just the
this
beginning.
Is section 2.
This is where she has the car ride app mishap. By the time she left this particular dinner party she's at, by the time she left at around 1:40 a.m., it was surge pricing. 7 minutes, her phone screen said, Kareem, 4.9 stars. When the map showed he was only 400 meters away, Emily kissed Rohan goodnight and stepped outside. The rain, which had been the weak garden sprinkler type that's characteristic of the London winter, was now strafing the pavements as if wishing to perforate the solid asphalt. There was a steady mist of spray rebounding from the street. In the orange bath of the streetlights, the scene looked like a film set created perfectly, waiting for the action to begin. She heard it before she saw it, a screech and then a grey Nissan taking the corner of St. George's Square and whatever street it was on her left at unacceptable speed. Was she drunk? She got in and said hello and added, it'll be a slow journey to Victoria Park in this rain, hoping he'd get it. She couldn't make out his face in the rearview mirror, only a pair of coal-black eyes with lashes that made them look as if they were lined with coal. Did he even return her greeting? She was jolted forward, then thrown back on her seat as he set off. Either she must be drunk, she thought, trying to find the clasp for her seatbelt, or the driver was a madman, or intoxicated, or a total amateur. How much had she had? 2 Campari and sodas before dinner. Then she lost count of the glasses of wine. Then Rohan had got out the Armagnac, and she had had what he insisted on calling a nightcap, although they were clearing up and loading the dishwasher and debriefing when they had started on it. She could ask the driver to slow down, but she was suddenly self-conscious about speaking. What if she slurred her words? And did she smell of booze? He must be Muslim. What would he think? But no, it was nothing to do with the alcohol. He really was speeding. Everything was going past her in such a whizzing rush. The river closed to them 1 minute, then snaked away the next, only to reappear and keep them company, dark and oily for stretches, then gleaming with shivered lights, steadily rippled with rain for what seemed like minutes. There was a tower on the right. The river had been left behind almost immediately after. Whitechapel was deserted at this hour, but still looked dense and squalid under the steady rain. They were going down residential side streets now, with frequent swings right and left that made her head swim. Had they crossed the canal? It should be a straight road with one right turn. Why was he zigzagging so much? And God, at such speed. She couldn't recognize where they were. Victoria Park-ish? So she took out her phone. The car lurched sideways, and the phone slipped out of her hand and slid under the front passenger seat. Fuck, she fairly shouted. Without thinking, she unbuckled her seatbelt and bent down sideways, almost on her knees, head bowed between them, her right hand groping under the front seat. There. She could touch it with the tip of one finger, but otherwise could get no purchase on it. Then the car bounced as if it were trying to take a series of speed bumps at 100 miles an hour, bumped and hit the road like a spinning top flung down from high by a capricious child. Within the duration of those movements, her neck gave an audible crack. She shouted, "What the fuck?" And then her head crashed so hard against the door that she screamed. She felt the car swerve, heard the screech of tires. She dug her nails into the seat and pulled herself up. For a fraction of a second, everything went black except for the pop of colors behind her eyes, and she felt a strange sensation of tingling inside her head, like pins and needles in her brain. The car had stalled. Something made her turn around. Through the back window, she could discern an animal, a dog, lying in the middle of the road, black and shiny with the rain, beside another heap. The bigger heap was trying to get up. It was a boy. Even at this distance, increasing by the second, and in this white and sepia illumination, she could tell that his front and hands were stained. He stood up for a few seconds, then fell over the dog. With another violent jolt, the car started up, causing her head to spin. The scene receded further and further, but seemingly in one flash. Then the car turned a corner. The boy and the dog belonged to another street, and she felt for a moment to another order of things, things that she had imagined, not seen. This, by the way, from my former student Sebastian, who's sitting here, it's inspired by the Lucia Berlin story Silence that I taught their class. So, yeah, I hope he's noting this.
Former student, though, so he doesn't get quizzed on it later. Okay, so we have some great questions from the audience. I'm going to start with an easy one. Does free will exist? Thinking of the political climate at the moment.
Oh my God.
I hope that's from your former student.
Does free will exist? Not really, I think. No.
When did it end?
Calvin maybe pointed out that free will didn't exist.
All right, so really is no.
Okay, we have to move on quickly from that question. This, I mean, this is the subject of there's 600 years of history to be dealt with in that question.
Okay, we'll do a slightly easier one. You said that you were tired of narrative and conventional storytelling. When it comes to characters, do you feel that freedom from convention leads to more grounded characters, free from drama, or ones who are more transparently mouthpieces for your intent?
No, I believe in characters. Certainly I believe in character, and I believe in believable characters, three-dimensional characters, in the Dickensian way of the term, the Jamesian way of the term, whichever way you take it. I don't want characters to be mouthpieces for ideas, which is the normal way of thinking about the didactic novel. Oh, these are not characters, these are just mouthpieces of ideas. I would actually defy anyone to read this novel and say these are not human beings, these are just the writer's ideas, like posing. The novel may have flaws, but I should hope that is not one of them. So. No, I firmly believe in characters, and I think one of the great pleasures that the novel gives us is in that lifelikeness of people it creates for us. Yeah.
Of the three panels, whose story came to you first, or was the easiest or smoothest to create, and whose was the hardest? Did you focus on, what was the process or order? Did you focus on the characters or the setting first?
This is an interesting question. I started writing Emily's story first, and she's called Emily because it's my homage to a former student who was one of my most brilliant students. I printed out one of her stories, and I started writing the Emily story on pencil. I write longhand on paper, and I wrote it on the blank side of the printed out page of Emily's story, and the character was called Emily. It was set in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and then I realized I could not work out a certain detail with the healthcare medical stuff. So I thought, I'm going to ditch this. I'm going to set it in England. So I started it, and then it was a dead end. So I had to like rewrite it, and then I stopped. Then I started writing Ayusha's story, and Ayusha's story has a particular time thing going to it. So I had to. It's written in very short chapters, and I had to order the timer. So those two gave me a lot of trouble. The easiest story to write was the cow story. I wrote it in 6 weeks in a fever, I think.
Yeah,
I just
you
wrote
can
it
tell.
in one
Yeah,
go.
you can
So,
tell.
yeah. But the book itself didn't take long. I mean, I didn't write for many years. I didn't write for about 3 years or something. During that time, I was getting into the teaching game in this country. I found that difficult. I found that very harmful for writing in some ways, if only because of time required. I used to come and teach one semester and then go back to London, and I'd lose all the threads of my book. But when I really concentrated on it, it took me about 2 years, 2.5 years to write. So,
By the way, that is really true about if you're writing a realist novel set in America, and one of the characters is sick, you have to think about healthcare. I mean,
Absolutely.
there's certain systems that
Yeah.
dictate authorial choices.
and I
plot.
wrote to my primary care physician, and they never replied. I just said, I said I want to do some research about this topic. I can't say what topic it is because it'll be what's it called, a spoiler.
Right.
And they never replied. I sent several emails. Absolutely no one replied.
Because Harvard Insurance doesn't buy you an answer,
Yeah,
right?
there you go. So.
Okay, so how much of this storytelling was intended to poke and prod at our generally accepted economic viewpoints versus simply being a byproduct of those?
Say that again. This is a very interesting question.
Here, why don't you read it? Because
I can't see anything.
it's
I recognize the handwriting, I think. Oh, how could this be? To poke and prod at our generally accepted economic viewpoints or simply being a byproduct. I feel the former, actually, to poke and prod at our generally... I hope more than poke and prod, like kick in the ribs or punch in the face, accepted economic viewpoint. So choice is a very big fetish of economics, right? Competition, choice creates stuff. And I thought, how do people really think about choice in their own lives, And
it's a luxury to have choice.
Absolutely. And also, economists have now come around to thinking that people make wrong choices all the time. They mispredict their preferences and all kinds of things. But we are still choosing. And so this phrase comes throughout the book, which is, what is a human being a lull between choices?
Well, and it's a great burden to have a choice in for all of these characters in different ways.
I feel generally choice is a burden, but you wouldn't want to be left without choice either, I feel.
No. But even Gari is making choices, very limited choices, impossible choices, but she is making them. It is part of, one of the things humans do. Okay, so this is from the person who asked if there's still free will. I can tell by the handwriting. And this really is an easier question, I hope. What's next on the horizon writing-wise? Maybe it's not an easier question.
I don't think I'm going to write again. I find writing difficult. I find publication difficult. I find reception difficult. I don't enjoy writing either. But I have.
Do you enjoy not writing?
Yeah. It's like the Dorothy Parker thing, right? when she was asked, "Do you enjoy writing?" She said, "No, I enjoy having written."
Right,
So
right. That's the old saw about
yeah,
writers.
I don't know whether, but you know, every time I say I'm going to give up writing, I'm going to give up teaching, the first question asked to me is, "What will you do?" The idea of having to do something in life,
Right.
again, it's a capitalist thing that has been
Right.
wired into us, right?
If you could
So-
unlearn the capitalist expectation, what would you be doing then?
I'm
Even, I
sup-
mean, even the question is framed in such a way that it's impossible to answer.
A
but
Zen monk would be nice, just like the blankness of nothing. And,
It's
you know.
very hard to
Of
do
course,
that,
it's
though,
it's the hardest thing in the
It's
world to
hardest
do.
thing to do,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's easier to do things than
Yeah,
not
it's
doing
much
things.
easier to be
Totally.
busy than not busy.
So I don't know. I'm contractually obliged to deliver another novel. I may. It's.
I'm sure you're giving your students real hope right now. You know, your former students real hope.
I feel you know, to not write, one doesn't have to do anything. One just has to not write. So
Right.
I can just not write, and at some point they'll ask for the advance back, and I'll give them back the advance. So, but the book that I'm contracted to write for them, and I'm no longer interested in it, is during the pandemic, I got a phone call from someone, an Indian gentleman in his mid-80s in California. He called me up and said, "I got your number from your brother. I knew your father when I was a little boy. Did you know your father was a terrorist?" And I said, "No." And he said, my father died when I was 21 years old. I was 50 when he called me, this gentleman from California. He said, yes, so he gives me details of how my father was a terrorist. Do you remember the name you knew your father under? That was not his real name. The British were about to send him to the notorious cellular jail in the Andaman Islands, from which no man has ever come out alive. And he went underground and changed his name. Did he have a gammy knee? And I said, yes. He said, oh, yeah, he was tortured in jail by the British. I said, did your father tell you any of these things? I said, no, he didn't. Because, my father was born in 1914. I was a very late child. He was 56 years old when I was born. India achieved independence, and he was, of course, by terrorist, he meant the British term for Indian freedom fighters, the people who fought for independence from colonial rule. And I was born 23 years after Indian independence, so it was in another part of his life. He was a different person then, and he never talked about it with us. So I wanted to write a slim novel about my father, and I'd have to imagine it entirely because no one is alive I could talk to. But I still haven't found the right form for it, and I'm also bored by the idea. Everyone writes a book about, oh, the father I didn't know, oh, the family I didn't have. I thought, no, I have to do it in a formally interesting way.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking more and more of a campus novel, actually. I feel I want to write a campus novel where I want to put everyone I know in the book. I'll lose all my friends overnight, I feel. But I'm happy to take the risk. If I ever write a book, that is. Sure.
All right, we have 1 minute. I'm going to ask one more question. Is that all right? All right. So this is, okay, because it seems appropriate for the time. So, you know, I think every fiction writer in probably every modern era has thought that their time was uniquely troubled. And do you buy the argument that our era is, in fact, distinct in its confluence of disasters? And the second part is, and how, if at all, should the writer respond?
This is a fantastic question, actually. I do
You
feel
have 1 minute.
I do feel our era is the most troubled. I feel we've reached the end times. I feel.
So what would Tolstoy do?
He would write a big long book about an adulteress. And yeah, of course, I feel it is like I am a political writer. I believe in the engagé artist and the intellectual. I feel politics is a way of, like, it's not Democrat and Republican and Trump and Biden. Politics is the way we live in the world. And the novel is a way of representing how we live in the world. A novel is always already inherently political. And I feel I have a duty in my novel, I think, to address my times. So I try and do it with the capabilities that I have.
Well, I want to thank everyone for being here. We're going to clear off the stage, and then Neel will be back here to sign. But thank you so much for coming, and please thank Neel for
Hanya,
being here with
thank
me.
you. Thank you.
No.